Chapter 442. Sky Blue Academy. This round of zombie synthesis was the most satisfying one for Yili. The overall strength of the Apocalypse Legion had once again reached a higher level. Yili also started extracting the corpse crystals from the mutant zombies' heads. Xiao He had successfully evolved to the 9th tier, and his skill list had also turned into Heaven and Earth Dao. Yili was well aware of the Heaven and Earth Dao, which allowed him to return to his true form. Yili wondered how gigantic Xiao He would become if he used the Heaven and Earth Dao. Combined with his devouring ability, it would be a sight to behold. The genetic warriors of Sky Blue Base had been watching this scene unfold. Even after 2 days and nights had passed, their expressions were becoming increasingly shocked, and in the end, they were all frozen in place like statues. Xiao Tsong and Tang Xiao couldn't help but shake their heads and smile bitterly. The world was still too vast in the end. In Sky Blue Base they were among the strongest, but when looking at the entire world, what could they count as? Only someone like Yili could be considered the main character in this world. Black Azura returned to the Dark Knight Castle with the Dark Knight tribe members, swearing never to become enemies with Sky Blue Base again. Xiao Tsong and Tang Xiao also swore that the people of Sky Blue Base would never be enemies with the Dark Knight tribe members. Yili stayed in the Xiao family for 3 months, taking time to recuperate and relax. Despite his current strength, he didn't need to engage in such dull activities, but sometimes, having the right mindset was important. After all, he was a demon now, and he didn't want to become the kind of unforgivable demon he detested. Mr. Yi, our family head requests your presence, a Xiao family disciple said in fright. Yili didn't say much, and followed the disciple to the Xiao family's main hall. The main hall was filled with Xiao family elders, and Xiao Yuzhu was present as well. Everyone stood up to greet Yili when they saw him arrive. Yili, with his current status, was considered the great benefactor of Sky Blue Base. In the eyes of the common citizens of Sky Blue Base, he was nothing less than a savior. Lord Xiao, why have you summoned me? Yili looked at Xiao Tsong and spoke calmly. Mr. Yi, the Cloud Peak Academy will be recruiting students in Sky Blue Base. Would you be interested in going to see it? Xiao Tsong asked Yili cautiously. For some reason, Yili felt a ripple in his heart upon hearing this. It was such a familiar scene, just like when he was in Huangjiang Base City. Lu Qingxue. Now Lu Qingxue and Quan Ruxue had gone to the Warriors Alliance, and Yili had no idea how they were doing. He wondered if Xiao Hui, Yun Man, Lu Qian, and Su Sinner from the Cloud Peak Academy were doing well. It was probably time to visit them. Let's go. Yili looked at Xiao Tsong and spoke slowly. After that, the high-level evolved beings of the Xiao family began to make their way to Sky Blue Academy. Upon arriving at Sky Blue Academy, they found that the students were already filling the place. Xiao Tsong invited Yili to sit at the head, and Tang Xiao and the family heads of the middle 8 families greeted him. At this moment, 2 recruiters from Cloud Peak Academy appeared in Yili's sight. These 2 recruiters were both 6th tier evolved beings. Let the testing begin. To enter Sky Blue Base, one had to have a minimum genetic aptitude of grade, which was extremely difficult to achieve. Moreover, genetic aptitude was inborn. To reach grade aptitude, you had to be at least a 2nd tier evolved being. Some students had grade aptitude, but were not yet 2nd tier evolved beings, and they were immediately eliminated. They shook their heads, showing deep regret. Becoming a 2nd tier evolved being was simple if you had grade aptitude, but it was of no use if you didn't work hard afterward. Chapter 443. 2 high-leveled, cannot be tested. Xiao Yuzhu and Xia Chun were already beyond the age to enter Cloud Peak Academy. Only Xia Shi, of suitable age, nervously approached the testing device. She placed her hand on the testing device, and after it made a beep, Xia Zai's genetic aptitude and level appeared on the screen. Name: Xia Shi. Genetic aptitude, grade age, 16 years, level, 3rd tier evolved being, passed the test. Upon seeing the words on the screen, a joyful smile appeared on Xia Zai's fair face. Soon, a few more students passed, and a 6th tier recruiter announced, now we only have 1 spot left. Yili slowly rose from his seat, which surprised Xiao Tsong and Tang Xiao. Mr. Yi, are you leaving? Yili shook his head and said, No, I'm going for the test. Not only Xiao Tsang and Tang Xiao, but also the elders and family heads of the middle 8 families were stunned. They looked at each other, feeling like they must have heard it wrong. But Yili really headed towards the testing device. The students of Sky Blue Academy were also astonished. They had never dreamed that Mr. Yi would actually go for the test. 2 6th-tier recruiters were taken aback, as no matter how they looked at it, Yili seemed to be around 20 years old, which was not the right age for Cloud Peak Academy. However, they thought Yili might just appear older than his real age, so they didn't immediately stop him. Yili slowly placed his hand on the testing device. However, the testing device emitted rapid beeping sounds, as if it had malfunctioned. Genetic aptitude is too high, level is too high, cannot be detected. Genetic aptitude is too high, level is too high, cannot be detected. The 2 6th-tier recruiters were dumbfounded, staring at the testing device in disbelief. Is the testing device malfunctioning? It's impossible. The testing device has never malfunctioned before. If the testing device detects SS-grade genetic aptitude in 5th-tier evolved being or higher, it cannot perform the test. Could it be? The 2 6th-tier evolved beings suddenly thought of a shocking possibility, and they looked at Yi Li in amazement. This student in front of them was an SS-grade talent, and he was not even a 6th-tier evolved being? This student, may first ask how old you are? One of the 6th-tier recruiters asked Yi Li. 21, Yi Li replied slowly. Both 6th-tier recruiters were shocked. Indeed, just as they had thought, Yi Li was not 15 or 16 years old. But even at the age of 21, having SS-grade talent, and being a 6th-tier evolved being, was an unbelievable accomplishment. This student, do you know that you are beyond the age limit for Cloud Peak Academy's enrollment? One of the 6th-tier recruiters frowned. If the test instrument was fine, then Yi Li's genetic talent and level were indeed terrifying. But there were all kinds of terrifying geniuses in the Cloud Peak Academy. In addition, everyone knew that no one above the age of 18 could enter the Cloud Peak Academy. Both 6th-tier recruiters believed that Yi Li was just here to showcase his genetic aptitude and level. Yi Li had no idea about this rule, but his expression remained calm as he looked at the 2 6th-tier recruiters and said, I am an exception. Exception. Both 6th-tier recruiters were puzzled, and it was clear they didn't understand what Yi Li meant. Your words are confusing to me. Please explain, one of the 6th-tier recruiters said, staring at Yi Li. I mean, whether you recruit me or not, I will be a student, Yi Li said calmly. Chapter 444. I've finished speaking. Who supports and who opposes? The 2 6th-tier recruiters were dumbfounded. They hadn't expected Yi Li to say such a thing. You dare to speak to us like this? One of the 6th-tier recruiters said coldly. In their eyes, Yi Li had some strength and good genetic aptitude, but compared to the vast Cloud Peak Academy, he was nothing special. Yi Li looked at the 2 6th-tier recruiters leisurely and said slowly, So have you agreed? This statement left the 2 6th-tier recruiters stunned once again. What kind of logic was this? As one just said, your age has exceeded the recruitment range of the Cloud Peak Academy. You'd better just leave, a 6th-tier recruiter said to Yi Li. Yi Li contemplated for a few seconds, then a smile appeared on his face. If you still want to leave here, then agree with what I said, Yi Li said calmly. The 2 6th-tier recruiters were infuriated and glared at Yi Li. As recruiters of the prestigious Cloud Peak Academy, they had never been threatened like this before. Brat, it seems you're asking for trouble, one of the 6th-tier recruiters said coldly. Xiao Tsang and Tang Xiao in the audience exchanged glances. Their faces showed a bitter smile. They thought these 2 recruiters from Cloud Peak Academy wouldn't have an easy time. Rules were always changed by the strong. Yi Li smiled and looked at the 2 Cloud Peak Academy recruiters. He continued, For Cloud Peak Academy to have me as a student would be your great honor. If you don't agree, then you will disappear from this world forever. I've finished speaking. Who supports and who opposes? The 2 recruiters from Cloud Peak Academy were completely stunned. Yi Li's meaning was clear to them. If they disagreed, they would die. The recruiters from the prestigious Cloud Peak Academy were being threatened like this for the first time in history. One oppose it. One of the 6th-tier recruiters said coldly to Yili, "Swish." The moment this 6th-tier recruiter finished speaking, a horrifying golden spiritual attack shot out from Yili's fingertip. With the sound of breaking wind, the 6th-tier recruiter let out a horrific scream that sounded like a slaughtered pig. A ghastly blood hole had appeared on the thigh of this 6th-tier recruiter, and blood was pouring out. The students from Sky Blue Academy were astounded. They would have never expected Mr. Yi to actually attack the Cloud Peak Academy recruiters. What was going on with these 2 recruiters from Cloud Peak Academy? They dared to offend Mr. Yi. Truly, trouble you shouldn't seek, yet they chose to mess with a godlike figure. The other 6th-tier recruiter was shocked and took 3 steps back. He hadn't even dreamed that this young man in front of him would dare to attack. And his speed was unbelievably fast. After thinking for a moment, his pupils contracted rapidly. A golden spiritual attack. SSS-grade genetic aptitude. Realizing this, the 6th-tier recruiter looked at Yi Li in horror. He never would have imagined that Yi Li was an SSS-grade genetic warrior, no matter how hard he tried. Are you an SSS-grade genetic aptitude holder? The 6th-tier recruiter asked Yi Li in astonishment. Chapter 445. Forced agreement. Yi Li smiled calmly and looked at the 6th-tier recruiter before him. What about you? Do you also want to scream in agony like him? Yi Li asked calmly. The 6th-tier evolved being was struck, as if by lightning upon hearing this. He took 3 steps back again, his face filled with fear. What are you planning? The 6th-tier recruiter had reached a state of complete bewilderment. Cold sweat drenched his entire body. 111. Say it again. Let me into Cloud Peak Academy, or I promise one will make you suffer 100-fold, Yi Li said placidly. But your age is beyond the Cloud Peak Academy enrollment limit. If we let you in, we'll face severe punishment. The 6th-tier recruiter retorted. Yi Li smiled. So are you ready to die, or are you prepared to face punishment? The students of Sky Blue Academy looked at each other. They knew that if the 2 Cloud Peak Academy recruiters didn't agree with Mr. Yi, their fate would be grim. The 6th-tier recruiter knew he was no match for Yi Li, who was an SSS-grade genetic warrior. His level was undoubtedly higher as well. He looked at Yi Li's eyes and found that Yi Li's eyes were very clean. But on a closer look, the 6th-tier recruiter's heart suddenly sank. What kind of eyes were these? Under their clean eyes were indeed like black holes, as if one would enter a reincarnation cycle as long as he looked at them. Suddenly, the 6th-tier recruiter thought of something. He turned to the genetic warriors in the audience for help. These genetic warriors were pivotal figures in Sky Blue Base. However, to his surprise, the genetic warriors in the audience all started to examine their own fingers, as if they hadn't seen anything unusual. Seeing this, the 6th-tier recruiter's face turned ashen. Okay, one agree. The 6th-tier recruiter said coldly. He knew that what a person like Yi Li said was definitely not empty words. If he didn't agree, they might really die here. Yi Li gave a faint smile. He wondered why they hadn't agreed earlier. It was all so unnecessary. This is the Cloud Peak token. When Cloud Peak Academy starts, you can enter with this token. After saying that, the 6th-tier recruiter handed the token to Yi Li. Yi Li placed it in his system space with a calm expression. A few seconds later, he looked at the still screaming 6th-tier recruiter. Suddenly, he raised his palm, and a gentle golden spiritual light slowly moved towards the injured 6th-tier recruiter on the ground. When the golden spiritual light reached the wound of the 6th-tier recruiter, the gruesome blood hole began to heal before everyone's eyes at a visible speed. The 6th-tier recruiter watched in astonishment. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. What kind of miraculous technique was this? Once the wound on the ground was completely healed, the 6th-tier recruiter couldn't feel any pain. He got up from the ground and stared at Yi Li in terror. He was now secretly relieved that he hadn't offended this young man too much. Otherwise, they might have met a grim end. Yi Li didn't say much and began to walk toward the outside of Sky Blue Academy. The major families in the audience watched this scene and quickly followed. The 2 6th-tier recruiters were stunned, especially the one who had asked for help from the strong individuals in Sky Blue Base. As he watched the situation unfold, a bitter smile appeared on his face. Chapter 446. Departure. There was still a month until the opening of Cloud Peak Academy. Generally, in order to travel to the academy from a typical base city, one would require a dedicated escort, because the wilderness was far too dangerous. Sky Blue Base City was quite a distance from Cloud Peak Academy, making it an ideal time to depart. Yili, along with Xiaxi and several students from Sky Blue Academy, began their journey toward Cloud Peak Academy. Senior, with your level of strength, why do you want to go to Cloud Peak Academy? Xiaxi looked at Yili puzzled. Because there are some people one want to meet there, Yili replied calmly. Xiaxi was stunned. Some people. The other students were also a little stunned. They didn't expect Mr. Yi to answer like this. The three students accompanying them were named Yang Xiong, Zhang Du, and Li Yin. Senior, are the people you want to meet girls? Xiaxi asked, her curiosity evident. That's right. Yili nodded. Yili had the route to Cloud Peak Academy in his mind, but he only knew the general direction. He wasn't aware of the specific names or places on the way. While the wilderness could be dangerous, the route they were taking was not as treacherous, because it was similar to an ancient Chinese highway. In this world, many such routes were heavily guarded by the Genetic Warrior Alliance, and they had checkpoints at regular intervals to ensure safety. As the sun turned blood red and started to set, the group arrived at a location. It was an old and rundown village. To Yili's surprise, there were still lights on in the village. Yili had heard that there were human settlements outside the base cities, but they were far less secure than the cities themselves. Especially at night, the wilderness was extremely perilous, and one could lose their life at any moment. With his extraordinary hearing, Yili had already detected the sounds of weeping coming from the village. Let's go take a look, Yili said calmly. The others nodded, and they walked towards the village. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the village. Upon reaching the village, they heard dozens of heart-wrenching cries, which sent shivers down their spines. Senior, what's happening? Xiaxi asked, stunned, her gaze fixed on Yili. Yili's expression remained unchanged, and he knew that such heart-wrenching cries could only be caused by the death of a person. Without saying a word, Yili followed the direction of the sound. The others quickly followed him. They arrived at a dilapidated wooden house, and dozens of people were gathered in the yard. Their faces were heavy with grief. Inside the main room, there was a coffin, and more than a dozen people were kneeling on the ground, crying in agony. Village Chief, you died a terrible death. Village Chief, we will definitely avenge you. Even if we have to risk our lives for the entire village, we will kill that beast. Yili observed that among the gathered people, there were 2 6th-tier awakened beings, and 1 8th-tier awakened being. He had almost forgotten that awakened beings existed, as they were far too weak in his current state. May I ask, what has happened? Xiaxi walked into the yard like a curious baby and asked. The dozens of people standing in the yard were shocked. They hurriedly turned around to look at Xiaxi. Chapter 447. Men don't cry easily. Dozens of villagers looked a bit puzzled as they observed the group of young people before them. Who are you? An elderly man in his 60s carefully examined the young people and asked in a slightly hoarse voice. Sir, we are students on our way to Cloud Peak Academy, Xiaxi replied truthfully. Yili was still outside the yard, listening to Xiaxi's response, and he couldn't help but shake his head silently. In the wilderness, good people typically don't die, and bad people don't usually die either. It's usually only foolish people who meet such a fate. Xiaxi's response was not only foolish, but also incredibly foolish. How could she say such a thing to people she didn't know? If it were heard by genetic warriors, they might decide to commit a crime and sell Cloud Peak tokens to those who needed them. These tokens held significant value. Nonetheless, it was too late now. Xiaxi had already spoken. As soon as Xiaxi responded, everyone in the yard, and even those inside the house, was taken aback. Even their weeping came to a halt. Seeing this, Xiaxi was puzzled. She had only spoken the truth and hadn't said anything false. Suddenly, the elderly man who had just questioned Xia, she knelt to the ground with a thud. "Please, sirs, help us take revenge for our village chief." Then, everyone in the yard knelt down as well. Xia Shi, Yang Xiong, Zhang Du, and Li Yin were taken aback by this scene. They had never seen anything like it. For a moment they were at a loss. Yi Li entered the yard and walked over to them. The people from inside the house also came out at this point. An 8th-tier awakened being observed Yi Li and his group. This 8th-tier awakened being was a middle-aged man. He was initially surprised but soon revealed a very joyful smile. "Dear sirs, one can sense a terrifying aura from all of you. One assume you are all evolved beings." Yi Li nodded, and then looked at the people who were kneeling in the yard. "Please everyone stand up." Even though he wasn't a good person, Yi Li couldn't help but sigh when he saw this scene. Surviving in such a post-apocalyptic world was no easy task. It was not as safe and prosperous as his original world. The people on the ground knew that genetic warriors were typically arrogant. If they didn't stand up, it would be a blow to the genetic warrior's pride. Therefore, as soon as Yi Li had finished speaking, they all got up from the ground. "Tell us what happened," Yi Li said to the 8th-tier awakened being. The 8th-tier awakened being quickly explained, "Recently, a fierce tiger appeared in the mountains. This tiger is incredibly powerful and has already eaten several people from our village. Our village chief was the strongest individual in our village, a low-tier awakened being. He went up the mountain to confront the tiger in order to protect our village. When we discovered what happened, we rushed to the mountain, but it was already too late. Perhaps the tiger had its fill, or it was just not in the mood to kill us. Otherwise, we all would have died. But our village chief had a terrible death. Woo!" After he finished speaking, the 8th-tier awakened being burst into tears. He was about 40 years old, yet he was crying. As the saying went, men didn't cry easily, only because he had yet to reach the depth of his sorrow. Xia Shi and the others thought of the scene described by the 8th-tier awakened being, and looked at each other in bewilderment. "Just leave this matter to us," Yi Li said calmly. Upon hearing Yi Li's words, everyone in the yard couldn't help but smile with joy. This meant that not only could they get revenge for the village chief, but their village could also finally be at peace. Chapter 448. Searching for the fierce tiger. The 8th-tier awakened being quickly arranged accommodations for the group. Xia Shi and the others had traveled all day and were feeling tired, so they soon went to sleep. Yi Li looked out the window at the clear night sky, where stars and a bright moon adorned the firmament. He thought that he would be able to see Xiao Hui and the others again soon, and he found himself looking forward to it. All encounters in the world are like long-lost reunions. The scene when they meet again, Yi Li wondered what it would be like. He too eventually fell asleep. The next day, the system's notification sound appeared promptly in Yi Li's mind. Zombie chest X25. Yi Li opened the zombie chests with a single click. Acquired 1,500 genetic points, 1,500 strength points, 1,500 speed points, 1,500 defense points. Acquired S-class skill, Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash. Yi Li had a slightly thrilled expression on his face. He integrated the attribute points he had acquired into his body, and then looked at the description of the Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash. Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash. An S-class skill that, when activated, changes the heavens and the earth. It unleashes a blood-red cross slash that carries the might of countless demonic and devilish phantoms, capable of devastating the world. Yi Li thought it wasn't too bad. He had gained another skill. Ding! Do you wish to practice the Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash? Yes. 10%. 30%. 60%. 100%. Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash practice successful. The Demonic Devil Blade Cross Slash was currently Yi Li's weakest skill, since his other skills had already reached SSS level. Xia Shi and her companions also woke up, and after a quick wash-up, they prepared to go into the mountains to find the fierce tiger. The villagers watched them leave with hope in their eyes, wishing that Yi Li and his group could eliminate the tiger on the mountain. It wasn't long before the group arrived at the mountain that the eighth-tier awakened being had mentioned. The mountain was covered in ancient towering trees and resembled a primeval forest. Various kinds of poisonous insects crawled on the trees. Yili used the heavenly spirit eyes to search for signs. Just as he activated them, a fierce wind suddenly started blowing. As the saying goes, clouds come from a dragon, and wind comes from a tiger. A huge tiger, about 5 meters long, suddenly burst out of the forest. The tiger's eyes were blood red and sent chills down one's spine. Its muscles were as tough as a coiled dragon. There was no doubt that this was a tiger infected with the zombie virus. The fierce tiger glared fiercely at the group. Its teeth, which were over 20 centimeters long, began to gleam coldly, and it looked like it could pounce at any moment. Yili had an indifferent expression on his face. This fierce tiger was only at the 3rd tier in terms of strength. He had originally wanted to try his new skill. Let's see how powerful Xiaohei is, Yili thought to himself. He released Xiaohei from the system space. Woof! Woof! Xiaohei started wagging his tail and became excited upon seeing a new place. Master, where is this place? Huh! Suddenly, Xiaohei noticed something. Since reaching the 8th tier, he could speak like a human. Master, why is there such a big cat here? It was as if the fierce tiger understood what Xiaohei had said. It roared loudly and pounced toward Xiaohei. Heaven offers a way, yet you refuse. Hell has no door, yet you insist on entering. Compared to the fierce tiger, Xiaohei was significantly smaller. But when it came to strength, the fierce tiger was nothing more than a bug. Just as the fierce tiger was about to pounce on Xiaohei, he raised his paw and slapped it on the tiger's body. Chapter 449. Senior, can you help them? Xiaohei was naturally of the power attribute, and it was easy to imagine the weight of his paw. This fierce tiger was only at the 2nd tier in terms of strength, so when Xiaohei gave it a single paw, the fierce tiger was instantly sent flying, crashing into over a dozen trees, and creating a large crater in the ground where it landed. Master, am one amazing? Xiaohei was excited and jumping around on the ground. Yili thought Xiaohei was quite mischievous. If he got a chance, he should try to find a female dog or something like that for him. But it would have to be of the divine beast lineage at the very least. Master, I used a lot of effort. Can you give me some top-grade dog food? Xiaohei's eyes were filled with expectation. Ever since he had eaten top-grade dog food in the zombie paradise in the Sky Blue Base City, he hadn't forgotten how good it tasted. Yili was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected Xiaohei to still remember that top-grade dog food. This surprised him. He then purchased a pound of top-grade dog food from the Point Mall, and Xiaohei ate it with great relish. Xiaoxi and her companions almost drooled when they saw him. After the earth-shattering battle, Yili had spent 3 months in the Sky Blue Base City. During that time, every genetic warrior of the base city had known about Yili's Apocalypse Legion. There was nothing too surprising about that. After Xiaohei had eaten his fill, Yili put him back into the system space. Bring this fierce tiger back, Yili said slowly. The others nodded, and Yang Xiong and Zhang Du quickly approached the large crater, looking at the fierce tiger inside. The fierce tiger had no signs of life left in it, and its body was twisted. Subsequently, they carried the fierce tiger back to the village. Do you think the seniors will be able to kill that beast? I think it should be fine. The Cloud Peak Academy is one of the academies operated by the Warrior Alliance, and it's very strong. I don't know. This fierce tiger is so terrifying. The 8th tier awakened being's face sank when he heard that. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Well, know when the masters come back. However, his words were cut off when someone suddenly exclaimed, "The masters are back!" With the exclamation, the villagers hurriedly looked ahead. Upon seeing them, the villagers couldn't help but cheer. Look, the masters have brought the fierce tiger back. The masters are really amazing. When the 8th tier awakened being saw this scene, he too couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. With the death of this fierce tiger, not only had they avenged their village chief, but their village could also be peaceful again for the time being. The villagers eagerly welcomed them. For them, this was the biggest celebration in history. After the cheers and laughter, the atmosphere grew heavy once more. Yili could easily imagine that at this moment, they were missing the village chief who had passed away, and he had no connection to it. Masters, we are truly grateful to you. If it weren't for you, the words of the 8th-tier awakened being were cut off by Yili. No need to thank us. It was just a small matter. Yili said indifferently. The 8th-tier awakened being took a deep breath. The village should be able to return to its former peace now. Senior, can you? Xiaxi was about to speak but hesitated for a moment. A few seconds later, she plucked up the courage and said to Yili, Senior, although this fierce tiger has been killed, what if there are other animals infected with the zombie virus around this village? Can you help them? Xiaxi naturally knew that Yili possessed extraordinary abilities. Chapter 450. Beneath Cloud Peak Mountain, Yili smiled inwardly at Xiaoxi's request. He remembered when he first met Xiaxi in the Falling Rock Mountain Range, and she was an ice-cold girl back then. That day in the Falling Rock Mountain Range, when a fierce wolf pounced on Yili, Xiaxi had taken action. In a parallel world like this, it was rare to find such a kind-hearted girl. Since Xiaxi had asked him to help these villagers, he decided to lend a hand. Yili opened the point mall in his mind, and spent quite a few points to purchase 10 genetic warrior upgrading elixirs. Drink these elixirs, Yili said slowly. After the village chief's death, there were only 3 genetic warriors left in the village, an 8th-tier awakened being, and 2 6th-tier awakened beings. Their strength was pathetically weak. The 8th-tier awakened being, and the 2 6th-tier awakened beings were puzzled, as they looked at the elixirs in Yili's hand. Sir, what are these? The 8th-tier awakened being asked cautiously. Senior won't harm you. Just drink them. Xiaxi reassured the 8th-tier awakened being, and the 2 6th-tier awakened beings. They nodded and accepted the elixirs from Yili. Without any hesitation, they swallowed the elixirs. Suddenly, they were surprised because they felt that they were about to break through. What is this? Subsequently, they quickly sat down and began to refine the elixirs within their bodies. In the end, the 8th-tier awakened being became a 2nd-tier evolved being, while the 2 6th-tier awakened beings became 1st-tier evolved beings. The villagers were baffled, not understanding what had just happened. But Xiaxi, Yangxiang, Zhang Du, and Li Yin knew what had happened and were astonished to see Yili, who remained calm and composed. Thank you, my lord. You're the best person in the world. The 3 of them were ecstatic. They could swear that they hadn't been this happy from birth until now. I'm not a good person, Yili said slowly. A good person? Since he transmigrated to this parallel world, he couldn't count how much blood he had on his hands. He was more of a ruthless character than a good person. Let's go, Yili said to Xiaxi and her companions. Xiaxi and her group nodded, and followed Yili as they left the village. The villagers watched them until they disappeared from their sight. The group continued to make their way towards Cloud Peak Academy. Half a month later, they finally arrived at the foot of Cloud Peak Mountain. The Sky Blue Base City was too far from Cloud Peak Academy, but the Annan Base City and the Huangjiang Base City were closer. At this moment, the group was in a small city. Although it was a small city, it was bustling with activity. The city was called Yun City, and behind it was a high mountain known as Cloud Peak Mountain. Cloud Peak Academy was located on Cloud Peak Mountain. Cloud Peak Academy was one of the 3 academies established by the Warrior Alliance, and anyone who could enter was undoubtedly a talented individual. Senior, can we eat something delicious? Xiaxi looked at Yili cautiously. Yes. Yili nodded. Subsequently, Yili used his heavenly spirit eyes to scan the area and found a decent restaurant. Yili headed towards the restaurant, with Xiaxi and her companions following closely. Upon entering the restaurant, they found it filled with many people, most of whom were youths and genetic warriors. It seemed they were here to enter Cloud Peak Academy. Xiaxi was a foodie and ordered many delicious dishes. Birds flying in the sky, cattle and sheep grazing on the ground, and seafood swimming in the sea. Chapter 451. Our big sister is formidable before long, delicious food was served. Everyone was feeling a bit hungry, and they all ate quickly. But when compared to Yi Li, their eating speed was no match for his. Yi Li ate as if he was killing people. Minnie couldn't even see his knife, and the person would already be dead, and Minnie couldn't see him using his chopsticks, and he would already be finished eating. Look at that person, he eats so fast. Let me laugh for a while first. It's like he's come back from the dead, as hungry as a ghost. How many days has it been since he last ate? The young people in the restaurant couldn't help but comment. At this moment, a young man walked slowly towards Yi Li. He appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, with a handsome appearance, and he furrowed his brows. I really don't like the way you're eating. Leave this restaurant. Who are you? Yang Xiong looked disdainfully at the young man. The young man sneered. My name is Wang Kong, a third-tier evolved being. Everyone in the restaurant put down their chopsticks, ready to watch the show. Just a third-tier evolved being, and you dare to act arrogant in front of Mr. Yi? You really don't know your place, Zhang Du said with a cold smile. Wang Kong was taken aback. He didn't understand how these people dared to speak to him like this. Among the four of them, only one was a third-tier evolved being, and two were second-tier evolved beings. The last one's level couldn't be determined, but he was likely hiding his strength. And Wang Kong looked at Yi Li and found that Yi Li's expression was so calm, even to the point that it made him feel a bit frightened. Is this guy too high-leveled for me to discern, or is he hiding his level? Wang Kong thought to himself. Then Wang Kong stared at the group. Very good. Among you, there are also third-tier evolved beings, but our big sister here is a fourth-tier evolved being, with an S-level genetic talent, and she's only 16 years old. As Wang Kong spoke, the young people in the restaurant were all taken aback. Most of them were only second-tier evolved beings with level talents, so hearing about an S-level talent in a fourth-tier evolved being was truly astonishing. At this point, a few more young people had joined Wang Kong, all of them third-tier evolved beings, seemingly from the same place. Isn't she just a fourth-tier evolved being? In the presence of Senior Yi, she's nothing, Xiaxi said. Xiaxi now believed that Yi Li was an omnipotent person. Such a person was beyond her reach, and a fourth-tier evolved being trying to show off in front of her senior was laughable. What did you say? Wang Kong and the other young people were furious. In their academy, their big sister was like a deity, and no one dared to provoke her. They thought they must have misheard. How could someone dare to say that their big sister was only a fourth-tier evolved being? Especially since the person saying this was only a third-tier evolved being. You just wait for me. I'll go call our big sister. Wang Kong roared and prepared to leave. At this moment, the restaurant door suddenly swung open. A young girl with braided hair, who looked extremely proud, walked in. Wang Kong hurriedly went to meet her. Big sister, these people are saying you're nothing. Wang Kong glared at the group. The young girl was named Yu Ling, and when she heard this, she was momentarily stunned. Then she regained her composure and looked at Yi Li and his group. You actually said I'm nothing? Yu Ling put her hands on her hips. In their base city, she was the supreme genius, and everyone who saw her treated her with utmost respect. Chapter 452. Yu Ling's shock leave. Yi Li suddenly spoke slowly. Didn't you hear it? Leave, or you'll regret it, Xiaxi added. Wang Kong and the others were shocked. They really didn't expect that they could still be so calm when their big sister was here. Did they really not know how powerful their big sister was? What did you say? Yu Ling gritted her teeth and stared at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled faintly. Why is it that when the tree wants to be quiet, the wind never stops blowing? I've already given you a chance to leave, but it seems you don't want to take it, Yi Li said calmly. The people in the restaurant were stunned. They thought, could this person be even stronger than a fourth-tier evolved being? Today, if I don't beat you, my last name isn't you. Yu Ling said coldly to Yi Li. Big sister is about to take action. Let's step back a bit, Wang Kong said. Then, Wang Kong and the few young men stepped back a few paces. It's ridiculous that a fourth-tier evolved being would want to attack Senior. Xiaxi shook her head. Upon hearing this, everyone in the restaurant unanimously agreed. that Yili must be stronger than a fourth-tier evolved being. Or why would these third-tier evolved beings call him senior with such confidence? Yuling was surprised when she heard this. She never dreamed that someone would dare to speak so audaciously to her. Prepare to get beaten, Yuling shouted angrily, raising her hand with a purple aura forming around it. Bone-penetrating palm. Yuling struck at Yili with her palm. It's actually the bone-penetrating palm. It seems Big Sister wants to take him down in one blow. The bone-penetrating palm was in level skill, and it was Yuling's most powerful move. She knew that with this one strike, Yili would surely be knocked down. What surprised her was that Yili didn't seem to have any intention of dodging, as if he hadn't even seen the palm coming at him. Could he be terrified silly by my bone-penetrating palm? Yuling thought to herself when the bone-penetrating palm was only a hair's breadth away from Yili. The people in the restaurant widened their eyes. They knew very well how powerful this move was. If Yili didn't dodge, he would likely lose half his life, if not more. Without a doubt, the bone-penetrating palm hit Yili. Yuling's fair face revealed a happy smile. She was certain of Yili's fate. But what she couldn't have imagined was that Yili's body remained completely motionless, and his face showed no reaction at all. It was as if her bone-penetrating palm was merely scratching an itch for Yili. How is this possible? Guardian Fox couldn't believe it. She truly couldn't believe that this was real. And level skill like the bone-penetrating palm. And it had no effect when it struck this person. The people in the restaurant were even more shocked, their eyes wide and their mouths agape, as they watched Yili. Are you impressed? Yili looked at Yuling with a calm expression. Yuling at this moment couldn't even utter a word, utterly shocked. Don't ever feel shocked, because everything I, Yili, do will leave you shocked for 3 days and 3 nights. Yili continued. Yuling snapped back to reality and looked at Yili cautiously. What is your level exactly? She asked. Yili smiled calmly. Is it necessary for me to answer you? Wang Ling and the other third-tier evolved beings had long been dumbfounded. How could they have imagined that Big Sister's bone-penetrating palm would have no effect on Yili? In other words, this person's defensive strength was extraordinarily terrifying. Chapter 453. School began in Cloud Peak Academy. Yuling had never seen anyone like Yili before, and she looked at him in utter astonishment. Yili's appearance was undeniably the most attractive she had ever seen, but that wasn't the key point. The real shock was his strength. The fact that her bone-penetrating palm had no effect on this person, apart from revealing his incredible defense, indicated his level. Yuling couldn't bring herself to think about it any further. She really didn't want to. Let's go, Yuling said to the people behind her. Her fair face was filled with desolation. She, who had always been arrogant, had finally encountered someone who made her feel anything but proud. Suddenly, Yuling recalled what her father had told her. Linger, even though your genetic talent and level are good, this world is full of geniuses. When you go to Cloud Peak Academy, you must keep a low profile. Back then, she had scorned his advice, but now, she realized she had been a joke. Just as Yuling and Wang Kong were preparing to leave, Yili stopped them. Wait. Yuling turned back, looking at Yili with a puzzled expression. I told you I've already given you a chance to leave, but you didn't appreciate it. Yili spoke slowly. Upon hearing this, Yuling and Wang Kong were both taken aback. What do you want? Yuling asked. Yili smiled. You've seen it. We spent a fair amount of money on this food, and you. Yuling quickly understood his meaning, and had Wang Kong settle the bill. She was eager to leave the restaurant now, because she felt utterly embarrassed. Senior, you're truly amazing, Xiaxi said with a smile. Yang Xiong, Zhang Du, and Li Yin felt the same way. They had immense admiration for Yi Li. Their respect for him had reached an unimaginable level. The people in the restaurant were all exchanging bewildered glances. Most of them were heading to Cloud Peak Academy, and in their home cities, they were considered geniuses. However, when compared to Yi Li, they couldn't help but feel overshadowed. Yi Li and his group stayed in Yun City for several days, and finally, the day for the school opening of Cloud Peak Academy arrived. Thousands of new students headed towards Cloud Peak Mountain, and after presenting their Cloud Peak tokens, Yi Li and his group arrived at the Cloud Peak Academy's training ground. The training ground was filled with thousands of new students, and their faces were more or less filled with smiles. Entering Cloud Peak Academy represented limitless future achievements for them. At this moment, a woman in her late 20s, dressed in martial attire, stood before them. She was a 7th-tier evolved being. I am your new student mentor. My name is Feng Ling, and you can call me Mentor Feng Ling. Now what you have to do is challenge the martial tower. The higher the level you reach, the greater the rewards you will receive. Feng Ling scanned the new students and said. All the new students were delighted to hear this. They had never expected that they would be rewarded so soon after arriving at Cloud Peak Academy. Now, I will take you to the martial tower. Shortly after, Feng Ling led the group towards the martial tower. In a matter of minutes, the new students all gathered at the base of the tower. The martial tower had 30 levels and had an exquisite appearance. Now, let's begin the challenge of the martial tower. With a light command from Feng Ling, the new students began rushing towards the tower in a mad scramble. As the tower's entrance was only so wide, a chaotic situation erupted, and it eventually devolved into a brawl. Xia Zai's group also joined in the scuffle, but Yi Li remained in place. Chapter 454. Challenging the martial tower, Yi Li looked on with indifference at the brawl involving thousands of students. Such scenes were quite rare. Feng Ling glanced at Yi Li, her fair face filled with curiosity. Why aren't you challenging the martial tower? Feng Ling asked. Yi Li smiled and replied. When the snipe and the clam grapple, the fisherman profits. Don't you understand this principle? Feng Ling was taken aback. She hadn't expected Yi Li to say something like that to her. Then, her expression turned cold. Do you not realize that I am your mentor? In Feng Ling's eyes, Yi Li should be a hidden genius, who was only acting arrogantly, because geniuses tended to be like that. She had encountered many such individuals. However, in Cloud Peak Academy, which was established by the Warriors Alliance, geniuses were in no short supply. One know you're a new student mentor, but what does that have to do with me? He didn't even look at Feng Ling, and instead watched the chaotic scene of the students brawling. Finally, someone initiated a challenge on the martial tower. Feng Ling was astonished. As a new student mentor at Cloud Peak Academy, she had never encountered such an arrogant new student before. You, apologize for what you just said. Feng Ling ground her teeth. She knew that someone like Yi Li, who acted so arrogantly, would likely not last 3 minutes in the wilderness due to his blatant hubris. Yi Li smiled again. He had come to Cloud Peak Academy not to train, but to meet with Xiao Hui and the others. Feng Ling had genuinely mistaken him for a student. In this parallel world, there couldn't be many people who could be Yi Li's teacher, could there? Feng Ling was taken aback by Yi Li's smile, and was unable to fathom how he could smile at a time like this. She couldn't help but become angry, staring coldly at Yi Li. One told you to apologize to me. Didn't you hear me? Feng Ling was furious. To be honest, Yi Li had no intention of clashing with someone like Feng Ling, a 7th-tier evolved being. In his eyes, 7th-tier evolved beings were rather weak. But if he ignored her, Feng Ling would not give up. Nevertheless, Yi Li had no choice but to tell her to shut up. Has anyone ever reached the highest level of the martial tower? Yi Li asked Feng Ling calmly. Feng Ling was once again taken aback, not understanding what Yi Li meant by that. Could it be? Feng Ling suddenly thought of a shocking possibility, which was then. She quickly shook her head, believing that it was impossible. No, since the establishment of Cloud Peak Academy, no one has ever reached the highest level of the martial tower. Although Feng Ling didn't have a good impression of Yi Li, she wanted to see what Yi Li was up to. Yi Li smiled leisurely and slowly said to Feng Ling, "Believe it or not, I can rush to the first floor of the martial tower." As soon as she said this, Feng Ling was stunned. She swore that she was really stunned. Rush to the first floor of the martial tower? Other than the ramblings of a fool, she couldn't come up with a better explanation. This student, you're concealing your realm. But I guess your realm is at most that of a fourth-tier evolved being. Let me tell you, there are many geniuses in this world. Some are mountains you can never surpass. Perhaps in your base city, you're an absolute genius, but at the Cloud Peak Academy, you're nothing, just a newcomer. Feng Ling had already figured out what kind of person Yili was, even though she had never seen anyone as arrogant as him. Chapter 455. Reaching the top floor, Yili smiled and looked at Feng Ling, saying, "Do you truly believe what your eyes see?" Feng Ling was once again taken aback, clearly not understanding what Yili meant. "What do you mean?" Feng Ling inquired. Yili smiled and replied calmly, "One don't mean anything in particular. I just want to tell you that you should never trust your own eyes, because there may come a time when your eyes deceive you." Feng Ling suddenly felt that she had been too foolish. As a 7th-tier evolved being, and a new student mentor at Cloud Peak Academy, she shouldn't have engaged in such pointless conversation with a person like Yili. In her view, Yili was utterly unreasonable. Someone like you, a 7th-tier evolved being, naturally wouldn't understand what I'm saying. Yili continued to watch the students outside the martial tower, who were still fighting. Upon hearing Yili's words, Feng Ling's pupils rapidly contracted. She couldn't believe that Yili could see her true level. How could he see it? Feng Ling was left bewildered, and she genuinely couldn't comprehend how Yili had figured it out. Yili didn't pay any more attention to Feng Ling, and walked towards the martial tower. Seeing Yili approaching the tower, Feng Ling actually felt a sense of anticipation. She hoped that Yili wouldn't even be able to enter the tower, and she wanted to see how he would react in that case. However, what happened next was something she couldn't even bring herself to believe. As Yili approached the entrance of the martial tower, he activated the 5th level of the ancient devil tome. Instantly, all the students who were still fighting outside the tower fell to the ground. Then he entered the martial tower. Seeing this, Feng Ling was left standing like a statue. Why had the students outside the martial tower suddenly collapsed? Yili hadn't fully activated the 5th level of the ancient devil tome, or else a terrifying demonic aura would have shrouded the entire sky. Feng Ling gulped, remembering that in that moment, her heart had suddenly grown heavy, as if she had descended into a hellish abyss. She couldn't understand why she had felt that way. Could it be? Feng Ling suddenly thought of a startling possibility. The feeling she had experienced was due to Yili. Yili entered the 1st level of the martial tower, and it was clear that the spiritual energy inside was slightly denser than outside. On the 2nd level, the spiritual energy was even richer. Yili continued to ascend, feeling no pressure whatsoever from the martial tower. It was as easy as climbing a staircase. During his ascent, he encountered students who had failed to progress on various levels. These students looked at him in astonishment, sweating profusely. However, Yili remained calm, showing no signs of exertion. Upon reaching the 8th level, he spotted Xiaxi, who was struggling to progress to the 9th level. "Senior, I can't go any further," Xiaxi said, her voice strained. "Stay here then," Yili said calmly. After that, he continued his ascent. Surprisingly, some of the students at Cloud Peak Academy this time were indeed talented. Yili encountered new students on the upper levels. Nonetheless, the number of students who had entered the martial tower was still relatively small, as most of them were engaged in external battles. However, they were now lying on the ground, unable to recover due to the pressure of the 5th level of the ancient devil tome. Before Yili felt any pressure, he had reached the 30th floor. And the 30th floor was already the highest floor. Chapter 456. First place, Yili Feng Ling stared at the illuminated 30th level, and her pupils rapidly contracted. Suddenly, she remembered the words Yili had said to her not long ago. "Do you believe that I can reach the 30th level?" At that time, she had not believed it, but now with the 30th level lit up, it meant that someone had reached it. The new students outside the martial tower had their eyes wide open, wider than ever before, and their mouths were agape. Even though they were seeing the martial tower for the first time, they had heard of it before. They were well aware that no one had ever reached the top of the Marshall Tower. At this moment, then, the results appeared on a monument next to the Marshall Tower. 1 SD place. Yili number of levels reached, 302nd place. Xu Xiao number of levels reached, 183rd place. Zhang Bai number of levels reached, 154th place. Yuling number of levels reached, 14 at this moment. Yili was on the 30th level of the Marshall Tower, looking out of the window at the scenery below. He had expected the Marshall Tower to exert some pressure on him. But to his surprise he felt none, even though it was Cloud Peak Academy's Marshall Tower. Subsequently, Yili casually descended the tower. By this time, a crowd had gathered outside the Marshall Tower to check the results on the monument. Their reactions were a mixture of shock and disbelief. The first place had reached the 30th level? That was the top level. Although these students had never seen the Marshall Tower before, they had certainly heard of it. Since the establishment of Cloud Peak Academy, no one had ever reached the 30th level. But Yili had actually achieved this? This can't be possible. Yu Ling, shocked beyond belief, stared at the monument. She had never imagined that Yili could reach the 30th level. Cloud Peak Academy's Marshall Tower is nothing special. I haven't even exerted myself, and already became second. At this moment, a young man in the crowd burst into laughter. The other students were taken aback, and turned to look at the source of the laughter. Is that the second place holder Xu Xiao? The students were bewildered because most of them didn't have tierings. To them, anyone who could achieve second place was an insurmountable figure. Although Xia had a ranking, it was very low. However, there was a trace of joy on her fair face. She knew senior would be first, but seeing his name in the first place on the monument still brought her immense joy. The second place holder Xu Xiao was incredibly handsome. He was now proudly pleased that he had obtained second place without exerting much effort. However, first place, Xu Xiao's heart sank, for he knew that achieving the 30th level was an impossible feat in his eyes. At that moment, he noticed another young man, who was 100 times more handsome than him. This left him in shock. In their home base city, he was considered the most handsome person. He couldn't believe that there was someone in the world who was even more attractive. Xu Xiao watched as Yili approached, and many new students had already gathered around Xu Xiao. They were clearly trying to curry favor with him. Yili stopped in front of Xu Xiao and looked at him calmly. "You're blocking my way." Xu Xiao sneered. "I've never made way for anyone." Xia Shi and Yang Xiong, along with others, stood beside Yili, glaring coldly at Xu Xiao. Chapter 457. I really don't want to deal with an insignificant ant like you at this point. Most of the new students had learned that Xu Xiao had taken the second place in the Marshall Tower. Naturally, they stood on Xu Xiao's side, hoping to gain his favor. Yili smiled. Xu Xiao was only a fourth-tier evolved being, and it was ridiculous for him to say such things to Yili. "Senior told you to move, so move," Xiaxi told Xu Xiao firmly. Xu Xiao laughed at her words. "Senior? Hee. In their home-base city, Xu Xiao was undoubtedly a genius. Now hearing a third-tier evolved being say such things to him was quite amusing. "If I don't move, what will you do?" Xu Xiao's handsome face showed a hint of playfulness. Feng Ling did not intervene. She was too overwhelmed to do anything. These new students might not realize how difficult it was to reach the top level of the Marshall Tower. She wanted to see just how powerful Yili really was. As a new student mentor at Cloud Peak Academy, she had never felt this way before. Yili shook his head inwardly. He had already given Xu Xiao the chance to step aside, but Xu Xiao refused. What could Yili do? Yu Ling, Wang Kong, and others knew that Xu Xiao's fate would not be pleasant. He would never know how terrifying Yili truly was. She remembered the scene in the restaurant, and felt a sudden sense of unease. "Move aside. I really don't want to deal with an insignificant ant like you," Yili said to Xu Xiao calmly. "What?" The new students were shocked when they heard his words. They couldn't believe that Yili considered the second place holder an insignificant ant. If the second place holder was an ant, what were they? "How dare you call me an ant?" Xu Xiao gritted his teeth and spoke coldly. In their home-base city, Xu Xiao was undoubtedly a top-tier genius, an insurmountable mountain for the younger generation. Yet even someone like him was referred to as an ant. Hee hee, Yili smiled openly. What are you laughing at? Xu Xiao couldn't understand why Yili was still smiling. After a few seconds of contemplation, Yili said calmly to Xu Xiao, what are you if not an insignificant ant as a fourth-tier evolved being? The new students were stunned when they heard this. They were genuinely shocked. A fourth-tier evolved being was actually an ant? This was a fourth-tier evolved being. Xu Xiao hadn't expected Yili to say such words and stared at him intently. Do you believe one will make you pay for what you said? Xu Xiao roared. Xiaxi smiled and remembered how terrifying Yili was in the wilderness zone. Even a 10th-tier evolved being wasn't able to defeat Senior. All the genetic warriors in the Sky Blue base city witnessed the scene of Yili fighting a 10th-tier member of the Dark Race in midair that day. They would never forget such a shocking battle, even if they spent their entire lives. Yili shook his head. He had just come to the Cloud Peak Academy, and really didn't want to show off too much, but it seemed that Xu Xiao didn't give him such a chance. Yili slowly raised his index finger, which was entangled with golden spiritual light. Suddenly the finger fell. A shocking blast of golden spiritual energy shot toward Xu Xiao. Xu Xiao had no chance of blocking such an attack, and watched in horror as it approached. Feng Ling was even more shocked. Even she might not be able to stop this kind of attack. Stop! She could only shout at Yili. Chapter 458. The shock of the new students. Feng Ling shouted at Yili to stop. However, the arrow was already released, and the attack with golden spiritual energy had been unleashed. Xu Xiao had no chance to defend against such an attack, and his pupils constricted rapidly. I'm done! Xu Xiao cried out. This attack was utterly terrifying. Ah! Xu Xiao let out a deafening scream, making everyone's skin crawl. The new students were stunned. Xu Xiao was the second best among the new students, and yet he was defeated with a single strike. It had seemed like golden spiritual energy just now, one of the new students remarked in shock. When the people around the new student heard this, they were shocked to the extreme. Golden spiritual energy? Golden spiritual energy corresponded to SSS-level genetic talent. The new student's eyes widened more than ever before. SSS-level genetic talent was something they had only heard of in legends, and they had never encountered it in reality. Feng Ling stared at Yili in disbelief. She never imagined that Yili was an SSS-level genetic warrior. She thought Xu Xiao was going to die, but now that she saw he was still alive, she breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, Xu Xiao was writhing in agony on the ground. He had never experienced such a severe injury. In Yili's eyes, he was merely a hothouse flower. A young man swallowed hard, realizing that compared to Yili, he was nothing. The young man was none other than the third-place holder in the Martial Tower trial, Zhang Bai. May I first ask who you are? Zhang Bai asked Yili, scared. Yili. Yili spoke slowly. What? The new students gasped when they heard this. Yili? Yili, the first-place holder who reached the 30th level of the Martial Tower? Now they finally understood why Yili had been so arrogant earlier. He had set a record by reaching the 30th level of the Martial Tower. The new students looked at Yili again. Yili's figure was not majestic, but in their eyes, he stood as tall as a mountain at this moment. They could never have imagined that there was someone like Yili in the world. Yili didn't pay any attention to the new students' reactions. He turned slowly and gazed calmly at Feng Ling. You said that the higher level one reaches in the Martial Tower, the greater the rewards, right? Yili asked her. Feng Ling was taken aback by his question and stared at him in astonishment. Suddenly, she noticed the profound killing intent hidden in the corners of Yili's eyes, with an imposing aura that extended both before and behind him. Was this really just a student? Top 100 follow me, Feng Ling said to the new students. Xia Zai's ranking was in the 30s, while Yang Xiong and others hadn't even entered the Martial Tower, because they were only second-tier evolved beings. The top 100 followed Xia to a building with shiny gold letters on it. New Student Rewards Pavilion. After entering the pavilion, Feng Ling began distributing prizes to the students. The top 90 students received realm consolidation elixirs. The higher their rankings, the more elixirs they received, and conversely, the lower their rankings, the fewer elixirs they got. The top 10 students received accelerated training elixirs, which, when consumed, would increase their training speed several times over for 10 days. When it came to Yi Li's turn, Feng Ling handed him 10 accelerated training elixirs. Chapter 459. Merely an illusion. Yi Li glanced lightly at the 10 cultivation speed elixirs in Feng Ling's hand. He had anticipated a great reward for achieving the top position in the martial tower. But to him, these 10 elixirs were no different from trash. "I'll pass. Cultivation speed elixirs are of no use to me," Yi Li said casually. The new students were astonished at his words. These elixirs were treasures. They coveted them, but couldn't obtain any. Yet, here was Yi Li dismissing their value. Comparisons truly could be frustrating. Feng Ling furrowed her brow, giving Yi Li a cold stare. Despite Yi Li climbing to the highest level of the martial tower, and being an SSS-grade genetic warrior, injuring someone upon his arrival at Cloud Peak Academy, and causing Xu Xiao's injury meant he would face severe consequences if Xu Xiao's condition worsened. Apart from the warrior's arena, Cloud Peak Academy strictly prohibited violence in other areas. Feng Ling acknowledged Yi Li's astonishing talent, and didn't wish for him to face consequences. In fact, when Yi Li intervened with Xu Xiao, consequences were imminent. However, she never expected Yi Li to be so unappreciative. "If you don't want it, just leave it." Feng Ling glared at Yi Li in anger. Yi Li's expression remained unchanged, for he spoke no falsehood. Those elixirs truly held no benefit for him. But why was Feng Ling so angry? Was truth-telling frowned upon in this parallel world? Soon, Feng Ling led the group back to the playground. The new students sighed in disappointment. They regretted not storming the martial tower, missing the chance for a reward. Yi Li returned to Xiaoxi and the others. He had considered giving the reward to Xiaoxi and the group, but then he realized he had countless ways to help Xiaoxi level up if he wanted. Yet what was the use? In the academy, it was all just sheltered cultivation. Only genetic warriors who had experienced countless battles in the wilderness were truly suitable for the post-apocalyptic world. Dear students, perhaps you don't know this. This isn't the real Cloud Peak Academy. It's merely an illusion. The martial tower you challenged is prepared for new students. So those of you with good results don't get too cocky. In Cloud Peak Academy, geniuses are plentiful. Feng Ling glanced at Yi Li as she spoke. Yi Li, knowing his own worth, understood that Feng Ling's words might have been directed at him to some extent. But he didn't need to concern himself with it. What surprised him, though, was that this place was just an illusion. The new students were also taken aback. They believed the buildings before their eyes were the Cloud Peak Academy. "Now I'll show you the real Cloud Peak Academy," Feng Ling addressed the students. As she spoke, Feng Ling formed hand seals and murmured incantations. Suddenly, an incredibly awe-inspiring structure materialized before the new students. Wide-eyed, the students were astounded by the grandeur of the building. Indeed, it was a university founded by the Warrior Alliance. "Dear students, this is the Freshman Institute." Feng Ling addressed the students. "Now, I will assign mentors to each of you." Subsequently, 10 7th-level evolved beings appeared. 10 of them, both male and female, were evidently the new student mentors. Chapter 460. Feng Ling's anger. New students in the top 100 will be under my direct supervision, Feng Ling continued. Following this, she divided the students by their tiers. Yi Li and Xiaoxi became Feng Ling's students. "Yi Li, I'm sorry about what happened last time." A voice as clear as a skylark's call reached Yi Li's ears. Yi Li followed the voice, and saw that Yu Ling and Wang Kong were standing in front of him. Both Yu Ling and Wang Kong were in the top 100, and they were Feng Ling's students now. "I've already given you a lesson last time. No need to apologize." Yi Li looked at Yu Ling indifferently. Yu Ling's face showed a bit of disappointment. She bit her teeth and looked at Yi Li. Yili, can you? Yuling didn't continue her words, she hesitated. Yili remained silent. His expression was unchanged, and he knew that Yuling had more to say. After a few seconds, Yuling finally gathered her courage. Yili, can you protect us in the future? Yili was slightly surprised. He thought Yuling wanted to let go of the incident at the restaurant. He didn't expect Yuling to ask for his protection. If it weren't for the fact that Yuling was also a student of Cloud Peak Academy, he might have already forgotten about her. Since he transmigrated to this parallel world, he had encountered countless people Yuling. If he remembered every one of them, his brain would probably explode. Ha! You were so tough in the restaurant, calling yourself big sister. And now you want senior to protect you. Xiaxi looked at Yuling indignantly. Why do you care what one say when I'm talking to Yili? It's not like I want you to protect me, Yuling said disdainfully, glancing at Xiaxi. Xiaxi was a third-tier evolved being, and she was a fourth-tier evolved being. She still felt a little superior to Xiaxi. You! Xiaxi stared at Yuling angrily. Yuling just rolled her eyes at Xiaxi and didn't bother to look at her further. Xiaxi stomped her feet in anger and turned her head away. Yili, you haven't answered my question, Yuling cautiously asked Yili. Yili couldn't help but smile. In truth, Yuling was quite interesting. A tsundere-rich girl who hadn't experienced many hardships. Up to you, Yili replied casually. Yuling was surprised. Yili, does that mean you agreed? Yili didn't respond. Instead, he heard Feng Ling say, Dear students, next I'll take you to the classrooms. Feng Ling then led the top 100 students toward their classroom. Upon reaching the classrooms, Feng Ling assigned seats to the students. In Cloud Peak Academy, learning wasn't just about practicing. Sometimes there were other matters to discuss. It was Yili's turn to be seated. Yili, go sit there. Feng Ling pointed to a seat. Yili smiled and looked at Feng Ling. I don't like that seat. Feng Ling knew that Yili wasn't easy to deal with. She tried to calm herself and said, Yili, then where would you like to sit? Yili smiled again. I don't need a seat. He had come to Cloud Peak Academy to see Xiao Hui and the others. He didn't expect there to be a freshman institute. It was quite troublesome. Although Cloud Peak Academy was established by the Warrior Alliance, it meant little to him. Yili, are you here at Cloud Peak Academy to cultivate or not? Feng Ling stared at Yili and scolded angrily. Chapter 461. Take me to the Senior Students Institute. Feng Ling thought that even with Yili's terrifying genetic talent, and probably a high realm, he shouldn't have this kind of attitude. She couldn't figure out Yili's exact realm, but she assumed he might be a 5th-tier evolved being. A 5th-tier evolved being with an SSS-level genetic talent could easily defeat a 4th-tier evolved being with a single blow. Yili, you need to tell me right now if you came to Cloud Peak Academy to cultivate or not. If not, you can leave anytime. Feng Ling stared at Yili, fully aware that individuals with such incredible talents and high levels often displayed extreme arrogance. But such people wouldn't last a minute in the wilderness. You're absolutely right. I didn't come to Cloud Peak Academy to cultivate, Yili said calmly. You! Feng Ling glared at Yili. She expected that her words would make Yili realize his arrogance and back down. She hadn't imagined that he would press on. Take me to see a few people. They were admitted to Cloud Peak Academy last year. Yili suddenly said to Feng Ling. The other new students were utterly stunned by Yili's behavior. They couldn't have anticipated that he would speak to his instructor this way. Xiaxi felt a bit disheartened. She had asked Yili before coming to Cloud Peak Academy, and he had answered her questions honestly. Feng Ling was taken aback, not understanding what Yili meant. Yili, what exactly do you mean? They entered the Cloud Peak Academy last year. Just take me there. Feng Ling was surprised. She wondered if Yili entered the Cloud Peak Academy just to meet someone. In a world where many aspired to enter Cloud Peak Academy, this young man had managed to get in, and was only here to meet people. Yili, you want to meet senior students? Feng Ling asked Yili. Yili nodded. Sort of. Feng Ling contemplated for a few seconds before saying, All right, since you want to meet them, I'll take you. She thought that by letting Yili visit the Senior Students Institute, he could see just how terrifying geniuses in this world could be. Then he would understand how abundant talents were in this world. She was doing it for Yili's own good. Unfortunately, she had no idea that Yili was a 10th-tier evolved being, and his Apocalypse Legion was terrifying beyond belief. If she knew, she would realize how absurd her thoughts were. Dear students, you're free to move around now. After giving her instructions, Feng Ling took Yili to the Senior Students Institute. The Senior Students Institute and the Freshman Institute were not in the same place. Feng Ling led Yili toward the Senior Students Institute. For some reason, Yili was really eager to see Xiao Hui and the others. He couldn't stand moving at such a slow pace. Give me your hand, Yili told Feng Ling. Feng Ling was puzzled. What do you mean? I told you to give me your hand. As a new student instructor of Cloud Peak Academy, you wouldn't have difficulty understanding my words, would you? Yili said indifferently. Feng Ling swore it was the first time she had been this surprised in her entire life. This person, he was a lecher? She wanted to refuse, but then a powerful grip took hold of her hand. After that, she couldn't say anything. She just felt herself moving at high speed. Yili's skill swift steps was now at an SSS level. He could walk 10,000 miles during a day and 8,000 miles during a night with that skill. Chapter 462. I'll give you 1 second to disappear. Feng Ling hadn't realized it yet, and she and Yili had already arrived at the Senior Students Institute. How is this possible? Feng Ling's eyes widened in disbelief. She stared at Yili in astonishment, but his face remained impassive, as if he'd forgotten their previous travel. She only remembered that Yili had grabbed her hand, and then they were in the Senior Students Institute. Yili paid no attention to Feng Ling. He was observing the scene before him. In front of him was a training field where many students were practicing. Yili, this is the Senior Students Institute, Feng Ling said to him. One of the reasons she had brought Yili to the Senior Students Institute was to expose him to the true geniuses at Cloud Peak Academy. However, her intentions had changed after their previous experience. Yili used his heavenly spirit eyes to search for Xiao Hui's figure, but found nothing. Yili, that is the real Martial Tower, Feng Ling told him. Yili followed Feng Ling's gaze and saw that the Martial Tower here was no different from the one in the Freshman Institute. Feng Ling, how did you come to the Senior Students Institute? A magnetic voice reached Yili's ears. Soon, a man of a similar age to Feng Ling approached. He was quite handsome, and surprisingly, he was an 8th-tier evolved being. It was clear that he was an instructor at Cloud Peak Academy. Rendong. Feng Ling's brow furrowed, and a hint of disdain appeared on her fair face. And who is this? Rendong walked up to Feng Ling and asked while looking at Yili. I was wondering, Feng Ling, is he your boyfriend? But he looks younger than you, Rendong said with a flirtatious smile. Feng Ling was taken aback. She hadn't expected Rendong to say this. Just as she was about to respond, Yili spoke first. Do you think I would be her boyfriend? Yili said calmly. Rendong stared at Yili, instinctively feeling that Yili was implying something in his words. What do you mean? Rendong asked. Yili smiled. Do you think someone like her could be my girlfriend? In other words, do you think she's qualified to be my girlfriend? These words shocked both Rendong and Feng Ling. Feng Ling knew that Yili was arrogant, and she knew he had the right to be arrogant. But hearing him say these words made her, Rendong was left dumbfounded. He hadn't expected a young man, who appeared several years younger than himself, to say something like this. Feng Ling and Rendong were from the same base city, and they were both instructors at Cloud Peak Academy. In Rendong's eyes, Feng Ling was stunningly beautiful, and he had been secretly infatuated with her for a long time. However, Feng Ling had always disliked him. You. Rendong stared at Yili, at a loss for words. Yili smiled and calmly spoke to Rendong. I'll give you 1 second to disappear, or there will be serious consequences. Rendong was shocked once again. This person was so arrogant. Rendong had met many arrogant individuals, but he had never seen someone this arrogant, not even heard of. Fengling, who is he? Rendong gritted his teeth and asked. He couldn't figure out Yili's realm, but even a first-tier evolved being could hide their realm. This wasn't worth mentioning. Rendong thought that Yili's audacity might be due to some extraordinary background, and he needed to find out more before proceeding. He's a new student at Cloud Peak Academy, Fengling finally said after a few seconds. Chapter 463. Do you dare to fight on the life and death arena? A new student? Rendong was taken aback. In his opinion, Yili must be the young master of some super family, or he wouldn't be so arrogant. Could it be that he came to Cloud Peak Academy just to experience life? May first ask which family you belong to. To be on the safe side, Rendong decided to find out more. Yili smiled to himself. Why was it that he was willing to give people a chance, yet they never seemed to appreciate it? I don't belong to any family, Yili said calmly. I gave you 1 second to disappear in front of me. Why didn't you seize this opportunity? Yili continued to speak to Rendong. Rendong was infuriated. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this angry. Young man, are you looking for trouble? However, Fengling showed no signs of trying to intervene. She wanted to see Rendong put Yili in his place, especially after Yili had said she wasn't qualified to be his girlfriend. No matter where you went, there were always people who enjoyed watching a spectacle. Rendong's voice was loud, and many Cloud Peak Academy students heard him. They rushed over to see what was happening. Who is this guy? How dare he confront Instructor Rendong? I don't know, a newcomer is fearless, but wait, Instructor Rendong will make him regret it. Perhaps when Instructor Rendong reveals his true strength, this person will be scared out of his wits. All the students pitied Yili, and it was clear to them what his fate would be. They looked at Yili, but to their surprise, his face remained calm, as if he hadn't noticed the punch that was about to hit him. How can a person like you change? Yili looked at Rendong indifferently. Hearing this, Rendong was even more furious. He raised his fist and punched Yili. If a low-level evolved being was hit by this punch, he would definitely die. Fengling's eyes widened. She thought that Rendong just wanted to teach Yili a lesson. She never dreamed that Rendong would launch such a terrifying punch. She wanted to stop him, but Rendong's fist had already reached Yili. None of the students expected that Yili had no intention of dodging at all, and his face was as calm as water, as if he didn't see the punch coming at him at all. Some students even closed their eyes, unable to bear the thought of witnessing a bloody scene. At that moment, Rendong's fist was mere inches from Yili. In the blink of an eye, Yili suddenly disappeared from where he stood, leaving only a blurry afterimage. What? Rendong, Fengling, and the other students were all shocked. They couldn't fathom how Yili had vanished in an instant. They frantically searched for Yili, and when they finally spotted him, he was already behind Rendong. Rendong turned around, only to find Yili looking at him with a calm expression. Ollie! Rendong had just opened his mouth to speak when he felt intense pain in his body. Then he was sent flying and landed heavily on the ground. More and more students gathered on the training field, numbering in the thousands. They all looked at each other in disbelief. The events they had witnessed today had left them utterly shocked. Rendong struggled to his feet and glared at Yili with malice in his eyes. No one had dared to strike him since he was born. Do you dare to fight in the life and death arena? Rendong stared at Yili. Chapter 464. The Life and Death Arena. The Life and Death Arena? Yili had never heard of it before, but he could easily deduce its meaning. When Rendong mentioned it, the other students were left in shock. The Life and Death Arena was an arena where the two sides competed regardless of life or death. Both parties needed to agree and then sign an agreement. All the students looked at Yili, wondering if he would accept the challenge. They were now somewhat excited. They had initially thought that Yili wouldn't be able to withstand the punch from Instructor Rendong. However, they now understood that not only were they wrong, but they were utterly mistaken. Rendong, what do you want? Fengling stared at Rendong and asked. Rendong ignored Fengling and continued to stare at Yili. Yili calmly smiled and responded, "The life and death arena? Since you want to challenge me to a life and death duel, it would be impolite of me not to accept, wouldn't it?" The news of a life and death duel quickly spread throughout Cloud Peak Academy, and the president, vice president, and academy instructors all rushed to the scene. At that moment, a man in his 60s, who was an 8th-tier evolved being, walked over. The man glanced at Rendong and then at Yili. "Do you truly wish to fight in the life and death arena?" the old man asked in a deep voice. "Yes," Rendong answered firmly. "Yes." Yili nodded. The old man sighed and said, "What are your names?" "Rendong." "Yili." The old man then printed 2 copies of an agreement, each with the respective names of the participants. After pressing your fingerprints on them, the agreement will become effective. Yili and Rendong pressed their fingerprints on the documents, and the old man collected them. "You may proceed to the life and death arena." Rendong walked over to the nearby life and death arena and stared coldly at Yili. "Come up." Rendong beckoned to Yili. Yili smiled faintly, and then leaped gracefully onto the life and death arena with incredible agility, covering the distance in less than a second. The other students were left stunned. His speed was astonishingly fast. They barely had time to follow his movements before he had already reached the life and death arena. "President, what kind of person is Yili?" the vice president asked. Both the vice president and the president were 10th-tier evolved beings, roughly 70 years old. "I don't know." The president shook his head. "Then do you think Yili will win?" the vice president continued. "It's hard to say," the president replied, gazing at Yili. He had a feeling that there was something mysterious about Yili. "Yili, do you know what it means to fight in the life and death arena?" Rendong sneered coldly. Yili smiled and replied, "Doesn't it mean that you're about to die?" What did you say?" Rendong replied, enunciating each word, his fury evident. Yili smiled again and beckoned to Rendong. "Come on, let me kill you." Rendong couldn't tolerate it any longer, and rage erupted from him, like a raging tiger. Tiger King's Iron Fist. Rendong roared and unleashed a punch, like a tiger pouncing down the mountain, creating a tiger illusion formed from spiritual energy that lunged toward Yili. Yili shook his head lightly, and though Rendong's attack had some power, it was no match for him. Swish! With a wind-breaking sound, a horrifying golden spiritual light appeared, attacking the illusion of the tiger. Chapter 465. What kind of finger is this? The golden spiritual light attack, and the tiger illusion collided heavily. Boom! Instantly, spiritual energy scattered. The students were stunned. Golden spiritual light? An SSS-level genetic talent? In Cloud Peak Academy, there was only one SSS-level genetic warrior. It was Wang Tian, the first genius of the academy. In their eyes, he was an insurmountable mountain. The president, vice president, and instructors at Cloud Peak Academy had never expected that Yili was an SSS-level genetic warrior. Even though Yili was an SSS-level genetic warrior, his strength was still too terrifying. Rendong was the former #1 genius of the Cloud Peak Academy, an SS-level class gene genetic warrior. As for Yili, although he looked to be about 20 years old, it was impossible for him to be more than 20 years old, since he could be admitted into the Cloud Peak Academy. This realization left the new students in utter shock. Why was there such a terrifying genius in this world? They didn't know, they really didn't know. When the golden spiritual light attack and the tiger illusion collided, they canceled each other out. Rendong was horrified. His Tiger King's Iron Fist was his most powerful technique, and he never expected that Yili could withstand it. Yili's attack had only used less than 1% of his full power. He was now a 10th-tier evolved being, making Rendong, an 8th-tier evolved being, seem pitifully weak in comparison. Yili gazed calmly at Rendong, who was full of anger, and said, "Use all your abilities. Don't let me kill you so easily." Rendong's entire body trembled when he heard this. "Yili, you." It was only at this moment that Rendong realized how foolish he had been. Just now, in the life and death arena, facing Yili's terrifying speed, he was sent flying before he could see clearly. Suddenly, Rendong's pupils were constricted rapidly. He couldn't help but believe that Yili was much stronger than him. And golden spiritual light? He would even rather believe that he was about to die than believe that Yili was an SSS-level genetic warrior. I'll say it again. Use all your abilities. Don't let me kill you so easily. Don't make me say it a third time, Yili said calmly to Rendong. Rendong swallowed hard, and cold sweat soaked his entire body. His heart was pounding. Seeing Rendong's reaction, Yili shook his head internally and said, "Since you're not coming to me, I'll come to you." With that, Yili activated his swift steps. Yili was nowhere to be seen, and only an afterimage appeared in front of the students. All the observers, including the students and Cloud Peak Academy's president, vice president, and instructors, stared with their eyes wide open. Yili reappeared in front of Rendong. He raised one finger. "I have one finger that can destroy the world." The sound of Yili's voice echoed in everyone's hearts, and upon hearing it, they felt their souls quiver. The finger fell. What kind of finger was this? No words could describe it. Rendong screamed, "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" Unfortunately, Yili showed no intention of stopping his finger. When Yili's finger touched Rendong's forehead, Rendong's life said its final farewell to the world. Chapter 466. Xiao Hui and the others went to Dark Mountain. Silence, a deadly silence. At this moment, absolutely no one could speak, because their mouths could fit a large bowl with the way they hung open. No one would have ever thought that Rendong, an 8th-tier evolved being and instructor at Cloud Peak Academy, had died like this. Life and death ring, life and death ring. The underworld had a new ghost, and Rendong was no longer in the mortal realm. Yet Yili's face remained calm and unmoved, as if nothing had happened. Yili glanced at the people beneath the life and death arena, and after a few seconds he slowly spoke. "Although I am a new student at Cloud Peak Academy, I didn't come here to cultivate. One came to see a few people." The tone of Yili's voice was filled with spiritual energy, permeating throughout Cloud Peak Academy. The president and vice president were taken aback. This wasn't what they had anticipated. The students were equally surprised. Looking across the entire continent, there were countless people who aspired to enter Cloud Peak Academy. But Yili entered Cloud Peak Academy just to meet a few people? "She is Xiao Hui, Yunman Luqian and Su Sinner," Yili continued. He hadn't seen the 4 girls with his heavenly spirit eyes. This revelation left the students astonished. Xiao Hui was the genius of their generation, with an S-level genetic talent. Feng Ling looked at Yili's figure in the life and death arena in shock. For some reason, her heart unexpectedly started to flutter like a lost deer. If anyone else had said they joined Cloud Peak Academy just to meet a few people, everyone would think they were a fool. But for Yili, who casually killed Rendong, an 8th-tier evolved being, it was a different story. Of course, they didn't dare to think that Yili was a fool. "Senior, Xiao Hui and the others have gone to Dark Mountain for training," one student exclaimed. Yili realized why he didn't see Xiao Hui and the others. It turned out that they were going to gain experience. This was the first time Yili had heard of the Dark Mountain, but it didn't matter. Finding it was a simple matter for him. Yili opened the point mail and bought an evolved being upgrading elixir, which he then tossed to the student who spoke to him. The student was a 2nd-tier evolved being. He took the medicine that Yili threw over and looked at Yili in confusion. "Senior, what is this?" "This is an upgrading elixir." "What?" The students around him all gasped when they saw the upgrading elixir in the 2nd-tier evolved being's hand. It was a precious elixir, and they couldn't understand why Yili had it. The upgrading elixir didn't have any effect on high-level evolved beings, but for low-level evolved beings, its effects were incredibly significant. "Come to the Dark Mountain with me," Yili said coldly to Feng Ling. As soon as he finished speaking, he took Feng Ling's hand and activated the swift steps to leave the Senior Students' Institute. The student who had received the elixir swallowed hard, overwhelmed by disbelief. The surrounding students also expressed their disbelief. The upgrading elixir was too precious, and they couldn't fathom why Yili would give it away so casually. Immediately, the student gritted his teeth and drank the upgrading elixir. Suddenly, his eyes widened because he felt that he was about to make a breakthrough. He hurriedly sat cross-legged on the ground and refined the medicine. In no time, he had indeed advanced to a third-tier evolved being. I've become a third-tier evolved being? The student was stuttering. The students around him could swear that this was the most regretful moment of their lives. Chapter 467. Dark Mountain. Yili took Fengling's hand and activated the swift steps to leave the Cloud Peak Academy. Yili halted his steps and looked at Fengling calmly. "Let go of me." Fengling stared at Yili with disgust. Although she had never met anyone like Yili, his strength and genetic talent were far more terrifying than she could have imagined. However, she knew that she hated people like Yili. Yili released Fengling's hand and said in a calm tone, "Where is Dark Mountain?" Fengling had anticipated that Yili would ask this, and her face twisted into a cold smile. "Why should I tell you?" Yili remained unfazed by her response. "Do you think you have the right not to tell me when you are in front of me?" Fengling was shocked. She really was. She never expected someone like Yili to exist. Why did she have to tell him where the Dark Mountain was? "What if I refuse to tell you?" Fengling stared at Yili. Yili smiled calmly. "I have 36 ways to make you regret it. Do you believe me?" He had never been a good person, nor did he know how to show mercy to women. He only knew that if Fengling didn't tell him what he wanted to know, he would take corresponding measures. Upon hearing this, Fengling stared at Yili and couldn't help but think of the scene in the life and death arena just now. She knew that Yili was definitely not lying. Such a person. Fengling really couldn't imagine why she could feel the aura of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood on Yili, who looked to be only about 20 years old. Such an aura even made her a little breathless. "Very well. I'll take you there." Fengling gritted her teeth and spoke. Yili nodded, and then he said, "Give me your hand." Fengling knew what Yili meant, and after a few moments of contemplation, she reluctantly placed her hand in his. Yili activated the swift steps. He was literally flying in the air. With the information provided by Fengling, Yili already knew the location of Dark Mountain. Dark Mountain wasn't too far from Cloud Peak Academy, and Yili's speed with the swift steps was astonishing. In just a moment, he and Fengling arrived at the foot of Dark Mountain. Yili gazed at the Dark Mountain, which exuded a weak aura of the Dark Race. There didn't seem to be any powerful Dark Race beings around. "Come out." Yili released the Apocalypse Legion from the system space. They hadn't come out for many days, so it was time for them to get some fresh air. Ada by Wawa, Hongye Yutong, Chi Bone Maiden, Long Yu Xiaohei and 18 Clawed Zombies. After becoming low-tier zombies, the eyes of Ada and the others turned black, but their faces still bore some signs of zombification. Fengling, who was watching, took a few steps back in terror when she saw the zombies suddenly appear. She stared at the Apocalypse Legion with immense fear. 10th low-tier zombies? And 7 of them. Fengling was horrified beyond words. She had never expected to see such a scene. Could it be? Her horrified gaze turned to Yili, and she had a shocking suspicion. "Never think that one am a member of the Dark Race. Don't try my patience," Yili said slowly. Fengling was so shocked that her soul seemed to have left her body. How could he know what she was thinking? "Don't worry. They won't harm you. There's nothing to be afraid of," Yili added casually. Chapter 468. Meeting the 4 girls. Fengling stared at Yili in terror. He wasn't part of the Dark Race, was he? Could he be a human? That was impossible. Fengling shook her head. For humans couldn't control zombies, especially not 10th tier zombies. At this moment, she finally understood why Yili's strength was so formidable. He was from the Dark Race, so everything made sense. "Let's go," Yili said to Fengling. Fengling was taken aback. She stared at Yili's flawless face in astonishment. You are a member of the Dark Race. I'm not going with you." Fengling looked at Yili warily. Yi Li smiled calmly. He had already told Feng Ling that he wasn't from the dark race. So why didn't she believe him? I told you, I'm not a member of the dark race. I don't want to say it a third time, Yi Li said indifferently. Then what are you? Feng Ling stared at Yi Li, and she knew he couldn't possibly be human. Yi Li pondered for a moment and then said to Feng Ling, I am a demon. Demon? Feng Ling widened her eyes. She had never heard of such a thing. Impossible, you must be from the dark race, Feng Ling said to Yi Li. Woman, how could my master be from the dark race? You really don't know anything. Xiao He looked disdainful while gazing at Feng Ling. What? Feng Ling was shocked, and her pupils constricted rapidly. She even thought she had misheard. A dog was speaking like a human? Feng Ling swallowed hard and looked at Xiao He. It was clearly a dog, so how could it speak like a human? She didn't understand, she really didn't. Brother, why does this woman insist that you are from the dark race? Yutong looked at Yi Li puzzled. Yi Li smiled and stroked Yutong's head. Let's go up the mountain. Yi Li looked at Feng Ling. After speaking, Yi Li headed up Dark Mountain. Feng Ling watched Yi Li's retreating figure. She gritted her teeth and followed him, but kept a certain distance between them. Soon, Yi Li and the Apocalypse Legion arrived at Dark Mountain. Yi Li activated his heavenly spirit eyes and began searching for the four girls' whereabouts. As the saying goes, fortune favors the prepared. Yi Li spotted Xiao Hui. To his surprise, Xiao Hui, Yun Man, Su Sinner, and Lu Qian were all together, appearing to be from the same class. It seems they've encountered danger, Yi Li muttered to himself. Xiao Hui, what should we do? Su Sinner asked Xiao Hui. Yun Man and Lu Qian had cautious expressions. They were currently surrounded by a group of vicious wolves. These wolves were all infected with the zombie virus. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their sharp teeth glinted with cold light as they stared at the girls, ready to pounce at any moment. Although these wolves weren't of high level, their numbers were considerable, amounting to several hundred. Xiao Hui was now a fourth-tier evolved being, while Yun Man, Su Sinner, and Lu Qian had reached the third tier. We're too far from Teacher Lu. She won't make it here in time. We can only fight our way out, Xiao Hui said. At this moment, Yi Li, the Apocalypse Legion, and Feng Ling were perched on a tall tree, observing the four women. There was a faint smile on Yi Li's flawless face. Feng Ling glanced at the four girls, then at Yi Li. She had no doubts. Yi Li had come to see them. Suddenly, hundreds of wolves pounced on the four girls. The four girls began using their skills to fend off the approaching wolves. Chapter 469. Reunion. After a long separation, the number of vicious wolves was simply overwhelming. Xiao Hui was holding her own, but Yun Man, Su Sinner, and Lu Qian, being only third-tier evolved beings, were clearly struggling. Let's break through, Xiao Hui said. The three women nodded in agreement. Shortly after, they prepared to fight their way out. Though their individual levels were not very high, the collective strength of the four women was considerable. Sinner, be careful, Xiao Hui shouted. A vicious wolf lunged toward Su Sinner at close range. Su Sinner, with wide-open eyes, was unable to evade from such a close distance. However, just as the wolf was about to attack, Yi Li raised his finger, and a terrifying golden spiritual light coiled around it. Suddenly the finger fell. A horrifying beam of golden spiritual light flew toward the wolf. Swish! The wolf that was charging at Su Sinner was instantly pierced through. What? The four girls were shocked at the same time. Su Sinner was trembling all over. She had thought she was doomed, but she couldn't have imagined that she would be saved. Feng Ling understood Yi Li's terrifying abilities well. She knew that nothing Yi Li did now could surprise her. However, when she looked at Yi Li again, she realized that he and the Apocalypse Legion had already disappeared. Heaven and Earth Tao! Xiao He shouted, and then his body rapidly enlarged, reaching a height of 10 meters. He appeared formidable from all angles. Seeing this giant monster, these wolves infected with the zombie virus were terrified. Xiao He directly used his skill Devour. The wolves successfully became Xiao He's meal. Xiao Hui, Yun Man, Su Sinner, and Lu Qian had their eyes wide open in astonishment. They looked at the young man with the flawless face. His handsome, fair face and his clear eyes. Senior, Xiao Hui's voice trembled. More than a year has passed and you've matured. Yili smiled and said to Xiao Hui. Hearing this, Xiao Hui couldn't hold herself back and pounced on Yili. Senior, I missed you so much. I thought I'd never see you again in this lifetime. Xiao Hui began to cry. Yili gently patted Xiao Hui's back. As they say, all meetings in this world were reunions after a long separation. Yun Man, Su Suner, and Lu Qian remained frozen in place. Especially Su Suner and Lu Qian. They could never have imagined that Xiao Hui knew Yili. Yili looked at the three girls who were still standing there in disbelief and slowly asked, How have you all been? Once they heard this, Yun Man, Su Suner, and Lu Qian snapped back to reality. Senior. Yun Man called out to Yili. Although she had been looking forward to meeting Yili, now that it had actually happened, she wasn't sure how to face him. When they were in the Annan-based city, her father chose to stand with Chen Ba. She remembered clearly that at that time had said these words. You are all flesh and blood, and this is your choice. Starting today, you will walk your own path in the sunlight, and I will cross my single-plank bridge. At that time, only Xiao Hui had been willing to stand by Yi Li's side. Senior. Su Suner and Lu Qian each called out to Yi Li. Xiao Hui and Yun Man were a bit astonished. They hadn't expected Su Suner and Lu Qian to also know Senior. Feng Ling, who was still up in the high tree, watched the scene below. This long-awaited reunion left her feeling a bit melancholic. Chapter 470. So you all know Senior Suner Qian, or you also know Senior? Xiao Hui looked at Su Suner and Lu Qian with confusion. Su Suner and Lu Qian nodded. Su Suner had seen Yi Li for the first time at the West Mountain Burial Mound. She remembered encountering a giant python there. And if it hadn't been for Yi Li, her and her sister's lives would have been in grave danger. Lu Qian, on the other hand, had met Yi Li in Huangjiang Bay City. At that time, Yi Li asked her how to go to the Su family. Seeing Su Suner and Lu Qian nod, Xiao Hui and Yun Man were taken aback. They hadn't expected Suner and Qianer to know Senior. The four women then shared their respective stories about their encounters with Yi Li. Senior, I'm a fourth-tier evolved being now. Xiao Hui boasted with a hint of pride on her small face. Now, Xiao Hui was also considered a genius at Cloud Peak Academy, although not the kind of super genius. Yun Man, Su Suner, and Lu Qian all had level genetic talents, while Xiao Hui had an S-level genetic talent, so her cultivation speed was naturally faster. At this moment, Feng Ling also approached. The four women looked at Feng Ling, and they were all a bit dumbfounded. Instructor Feng Ling, how come you're here? When Xiao Hui and her fellow students first entered the Freshman Institute at Cloud Peak Academy, Feng Ling was their teacher. Feng Ling felt a bit awkward, feeling like she was shining brighter than a 3,000-watt light bulb in this situation. Feng Ling didn't know how to answer. Could she just say that she was forcibly brought here by Yi Li? Senior, what about Ada and the others? At this point, the four women finally looked at the Apocalypse Legion. They had been at Cloud Peak Academy for over a year now, so they naturally knew about low-tier zombies, which were also known as Zombie Kings. 7 Zombie Kings were truly terrifying. Woof woof woof. I'm Xiaohei, a divine beast. Xiaohei introduced himself to the four girls. What an adorable dog. Xiao Hui reached out to pat Xiaohei's head. After Yi Li introduced the Apocalypse Legion to the four women, they were once again left in shock. Just over a year had passed, but they couldn't have imagined that Senior's strength had already reached this level. At this moment, a 7th-tier evolved being approached. She was a woman of similar age to Feng Ling, with dozens of students following behind her. Teacher Lu is here, Yun Man said. The teacher Lu Yun Man referred to was named Lu Yu, and she was just about to speak. However, her entire body was suddenly struck as if by lightning, and she watched the scene before her with disbelief. 10th-tier zombies? Lu Yu quickly retreated several steps, and the students behind her reacted with even greater panic. Some of the more timid ones were even scared to the point of collapsing on the ground. These were low-tier zombie kings. Teacher Lu, don't worry. Ada and the others won't harm you. Xiao Hui sweetly reassured Lu Yu. Lu Yu was shocked, and she looked at the four women. She naturally recognized Feng Ling, although she was unsure why Feng Ling was here. But there was a young man she had never seen before. All right, you should all return to Cloud Peak Academy for now, and I'll come find you later, Yili said. Yes, senior, Xiao Hui replied. Lu Yu was stunned. Could it be? She suddenly thought of a shocking possibility, which was that these zombies were all controlled by this young man in front of her. Just as the four girls were preparing to move closer to Lu Yu, a sinister laughter suddenly reached everyone's ears. Giggle, so many humans. It looks like 111 have a feast. Chapter 471. Never flee in front of me. Yili followed the voice and found a malevolent spirit from the dark race standing in front of them. This malevolent spirit from the dark race was an 8th-tier member of the dark race. Lu Yu, Feng Ling, and the four girls felt the immense aura emanating from the malevolent spirit. The Dark Mountain? Are there actually such terrifying creatures from the dark race here? Lu Yu exclaimed in shock. All these students were shocked beyond belief. They were like delicate flowers that had grown in a greenhouse, and encountering such terrifying dark race creatures was enough to scare them witless. Suddenly, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit seemed to have discovered something. His pupils rapidly contracted. Low-tier zombie kings? The 8th-tier malevolent spirit was shaken, and he stared at Yili with disbelief. He preferred to believe that the sky was falling than to accept the fact that the Dark Mountain had low-tier zombie kings. And 7 of them. In addition, there were also 18 9th-tier clawed zombies, and a 9th-tier dog? He simply couldn't believe this was real. What had happened to the world? Are you very scared? Yili looked calmly at the 8th-tier malevolent spirit. The 8th-tier malevolent spirit was startled, and he stared at Yili in horror. You. At this moment, Yili's words indicated that this human was controlling these terrifying zombies. However, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit began to sweat profusely. The human teenager before him didn't emit the aura of the dark race, yet humans couldn't control zombies. With these thoughts in mind, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit was even more horrified. You are not from the dark race. The 8th-tier malevolent spirit stared at Yili. Lu Yu and the others all looked at Yili. In the end times, it was common knowledge that only the dark race could control zombies. However, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit said that Yili was not from the dark race. Although they were very afraid, they also wanted to know how Yili would respond. Yili smiled and calmly said, Indeed, I'm not from the dark race. If you're interested, you can call me Demon King Yili. Demon King Yili. Everyone was surprised, and while they didn't know what a Demon King was, just hearing the name Demon King, Yili conveyed an unparalleled dominance. At this point, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit only had one thought: escape. He had thought he would have a nice meal, but he hadn't expected to encounter such a fierce existence. You want to escape? Yili looked at the 8th-tier malevolent spirit and said calmly. The 8th-tier malevolent spirit was shocked. Could this Demon King actually read his thoughts? Yili sighed softly and said, Never try to flee in front of me. Don't try my patience. As the sound of his voice fell, a shocking golden spirit light flew toward the 8th-tier malevolent spirit. With a wind-breaking sound, the 8th-tier malevolent spirit had already been pierced through by the golden spirit light. Silence, a long silence. Everyone was like statues, including the four girls. An 8th-tier member of the dark race had been killed so easily, they hadn't even had time to see the entire process. It was all too fast. The only thing they saw was that a terrifying golden spirit light had emanated from Yili's fingertip and attacked. Golden spirit light. Everyone's eyes widened. They naturally knew what the golden spirit light represented. An SSS-level genetic warrior. Yili smiled faintly, thinking that there was nothing worth staying at Cloud Peak Academy for. He decided to roam outdoors and see if he could find the malevolent spirit tribe. If he didn't find it, so be it. But if he did find it, he would eradicate the entire tribe. Chapter 472, Lord-level zombies in Star City. You've become quite powerful, haven't you, Senior? Xiao Hui said to Yili. Yili smiled. You should return to Cloud Peak Academy for now. I'll come find you later. Xiao Hui nodded. All right, Senior. Although Lu Yu was a teacher at Cloud Peak Academy, she had never seen anyone like Yili before, not even heard of. She couldn't wait to leave Dark Mountain now, and hearing Yili's words was a relief. Then Lu Yu led the new students down the mountain. As Feng Ling took her first step, she heard Yili's voice. You can't leave. Feng Ling felt as if she had been electrocuted. She turned around and looked at Yili. Is there something else? After Yili had casually killed the 8th-tier malevolent spirit with a single finger, Feng Ling knew that someone like Yili was incredibly cold-hearted and decisive. Besides, he had the Apocalypse Legion. Feng Ling had always thought that the Cloud Peak Academy was a supreme force in this world. But compared to Yili, it seemed to be nothing. Feng Ling thought of Xiao He, a tiny dog that had suddenly grown to several yards in size and devoured hundreds of feral wolves. There were no words to describe the shock she felt. Do you hate me? Yili looked at Feng Ling with a calm expression. In this parallel world, Yili had been through thousands of flowers without a single leaf touching him. No one could hate him when facing him. But this Feng Ling, Yili secretly smiled. To be honest, he felt that Feng Ling was quite interesting. Feng Ling didn't expect Yili to say such a thing. She didn't know how to answer. That's right. At first, she hated Yili because she felt that Yili was too arrogant. But now she no longer hated him. It was more accurate to say that she didn't dare to hate him. She was genuinely afraid that Yili would use the golden spirit light to pierce her through. Yili looked at Feng Ling, who appeared somewhat fearful, and continued. Even though you're just a pitiful 7th-tier evolved being, you should know that you need a goal in your life. Your goal should be never to hate me. No one in this world can afford to hate me, Yili said. Arrogant, absolutely arrogant. However, Feng Ling couldn't sense any arrogance at this moment. Her heart raced as she stole a glance at Yili. Standing there, Yili gave her an incredible visual impact, and she couldn't stop her heart from racing. Take me to a place with many zombies, Yili said to Feng Ling. Feng Ling was momentarily stunned. A place with many zombies? She didn't understand why Yili would want to go to a place with a high concentration of zombies. But she knew she couldn't ask too many questions. If she angered Yili, and he pierced her with a finger, the consequences would be dire. Yili, there are many zombies in Star City, and there are also Lord-level zombies. Do you want to? Before Feng Ling could finish her sentence, Yili interrupted her. Let's go there then, Yili said. Lord-level zombies, meaning low-tier zombies. Yili had never seen a low-tier zombie before, and now he was feeling a bit curious. After placing the Apocalypse Legion into the system space, Yili followed Feng Ling toward Star City. They hadn't walked far when Feng Ling hesitated. She couldn't suppress her curiosity, stopped in her tracks and asked, Yili, what is your realm? Yili nodded slightly, looked at the sun in the sky, and then spoke slowly after a few seconds. Just a low-tier evolved being. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.